My guest tonight is an author and a former financial services professional who had a front row seat to the economic disaster of 2008, the mortgage crisis, a man who was red-pilled by the book Confessions of a Financial Hitman. Is that it? My guest, of course, is Charlie Robinson, and the book is The Octopus of Global Control. Charlie, welcome to the show. How are you tonight?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure. I've been looking forward to this all week long. So
likewise, likewise. Did I get that description right as far as your background?
Yeah, my background was I worked in new home sales in Las Vegas, and I saw from 2003 to 2012. I still work in real estate in Las Vegas, but I saw the madness of that real estate bubble filling up, and then the eventual popping of it. And it was fine. There wasn't much. I mean, it was a frenzy for sure, and it was an unsustainable bubble and all that. And there were people camping out in front of our new home sales developments to try and get in, to be the first person to get into the lottery the following day, to get their name pulled, to be able to buy a house. So all of that was totally unsustainable. I think we knew that. But what happened was, as it stalled out at the top, say like 2007, the large builders had so much of a stake in this. They had so much land. They couldn't afford for things to fizzle out. So they came up with creative new ways to sort of stimulate the market. In the case, what we saw was what you would consider a bucket of incentive money to play with. Now, you could take that money, where I was selling $500,000 houses, $100,000 of incentive money. You take that and just take it right off the price of your $500,000 house, pay $400,000 for it, and that was fine. Or you could use some of that money to pay down your interest rate or cover your closing costs, and all that is totally fine and legal. But what I saw that was horrifying was, as we ran out of ideas, and as the sales started to sort of stall out a little bit, they would say, well, why don't we use some of this incentive money to, I don't know, pay off your credit cards or pay off your car payments. And so you'd have a husband and wife come in looking to buy a house that they couldn't afford. And then you could make their $10,000 each of credit card debt go away, each of their $20,000 car loans that they had, and then run their numbers, and magically they would qualify to buy this house that they shouldn't be buying. And that, of course, is mortgage fraud. And so when our boss rolled that thing out to us at a sales meeting, I raised my hand and said, have we cleared this with our legal department? And I will never forget the words he said. I'd rather beg for forgiveness than ask for permission. And I realized, like, oh, this is not good. And so I was pretty vocal about that. I'm not doing that. I'm not. I have a real estate license. I don't want to participate in this nonsense.
Very brave, by the way, to do that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I didn't really do all that. I mean, I was drinking the Kool-Aid too. So I was like selling these homes and believing it, because I bought a house, I bought an investment house, I was like, hey, this is a great thing. So I wasn't like out to con anyone, but once I saw the loan programs disappearing daily, like, they were just going away. And then these no income, no verification loans, which are obviously a recipe for disaster, compounded with the fraud that we were being asked to participate in. I was like, I'm not interested in doing this. And so, of course, I was later fired, not for questioning that, of course, because that would be too obvious. But so at the same time, I'm living this. I'm reading John Perkins' book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, and I'm understanding that what he was doing in the 60s was putting countries into these loan programs that they couldn't afford and coercing them into it. And I was like, oh my God, I'm like living a smaller version of this. And so between the two of those, it kind of woke me up to the global fraud, what is, the World Bank and the IMF, and how they collude to, where I was selling houses to people that couldn't afford it, they were selling hydroelectric power plants to countries that couldn't afford it, and they were.
Let me pause you for a second, Charlie. So, in the case of this incentive money, that was coming from who? The government, the builders?
No, the builder. So the builder was, they'd bought the land. Typically, they'd bought the land at a good price, and so they could afford to do this. As things, they had always intended to sell these houses for, say, $300,000. So now they're going up, and now the price is $500,000. And when that stalls out, they decide, well, let's motivate the buyers to come in here and buy our houses. So they would create this incentive money. So to them, selling that house at $400,000 now is still
okay.
a great deal.
Right.
Yeah, they're still fine with that. But the way let me be clear, having incentive money, buying down someone's interest rates and covering their closing costs, those are all legal. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just a market function. But when you do things to affect a buyer's ability to get qualified to buy a house, like paying off their credit cards. I mean, if you run somebody's credit and they have two car payments and 2 credit card payments, their debt to income ratios are going to be out of whack. Once you remove all that debt and then run their numbers, they're like the dream buyer that comes in, So people were looking great all of a sudden on paper, right. And then that information was being removed from the contract before the contract
right.
was handed to the mortgage department. Which
so
is
it's really not
wrong.
Protecting the lender at all, because they're just basically erasing the problem with this particular borrower and then saying, hey, here's a great candidate for a loan. And we all right. know what the result was. You've spoken in many previous interviews about the film The Big Short, and I know right. you're a big fan of comedy and thoughtful comedy from guys like George Carlin and Joe Rogan, and people who are actually very intelligent, and in the case of Joe Rogan, of course, has gone into podcasting. So it's interesting to see how the internet and social media has allowed us, guys like you and I, we would have not connected without the social media platform that is enabling Crowdsource the Truth. And I'm very intrigued. You've got this great financial background. You've become an author now. You're very focused on false flags and a lot of the topics that are of interest to people who watch Crowdsource the Truth. Something that I've observed is that, people have a short memory for the most part. And I think that those that are perpetrating these types of financial crimes are relying on that. And I go back just even a little bit in time and I look at the Enron situation, I look at the savings and loan crisis of the 1980s, and particularly that S&L crisis really seemed to me almost like a dress rehearsal or a beta test for the same kind of thing we saw with the subprime mortgage crisis. But the S&L was almost like the domestic version of it, and the subprime, they rolled it out internationally. Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, I think that with the savings and loan scandal, they saw, if we do it this way, some people go to prison. We don't want that. So they wanted to tweak it to make sure that nobody in their group goes to prison, which of course they did. And they did that by having Clinton abolish the Glass-Steagall, and then they basically turned these investment brokerages into casinos, and then just gambled like crazy with other people's money and with investor money, and then blew up the economy, and then held a gun to the government's head, begging for TARP money. So
but that's critical. That's kind of always the way it goes, right? There's got to be this government piece where there's something waiting to bail it out, so they can, really irresponsibly use the money or give out loans. I mean, as I understand it, in the case of the S&L crisis, it was a lot of, these savings and loans weren't exactly banks, but they were sort of like community lenders dealing with families, and they eliminated some regulation that allowed them to give out these riskier loans, and the guys who took the loans knew that this was a plan that was in place, and they just used the money and never paid it back and put these things out of business and took the money. Right.
And in the case of me, when I was dealing in new home sales, we talked about not worrying about screwing the lender on this. Well, in our case, who was the lender that was creating the mortgages that we were giving to our clients, that lender never intended to service that loan anyway. So they were going, as soon as that house closed, as soon as that loan, became a tangible asset, they sold that thing the next day to Wall Street. And then that's where, in The Big Short, it was packaged into these
Collateralized
debt obligations, which was, basically like a sausage making factory, and they stamped AAA on it, and not because it was, but because they had the regulators in their pocket. And it's like, hey, if you don't give me AAA, I'm going to go to the other guy. And it's like, well, let's just retain this business and do what we need to do. And what are the chances this thing is going to blow up anyway? So my fear is so when we had the meltdown in 2008, that was a bailout, right? So that money came from outside, and it came to the bank, and it gave them the liquidity that they needed to keep themselves running. My fear is that, well, it's not unfounded, is that next time it will be a bail-in, which is they just take all the money in the bank. And it sounds crazy, and that sounds like they would never do that. There would be outrage.
What do you mean take all the money in the bank? Who's going to do that?
They changed the laws a couple years ago, allowing the banks to retain the money that is in their bank. If something goes wrong, they can keep it all. Now, you might think...
So your money and my money, the bank can keep it?
The minute we put it in the bank, it's their money. And we're not in first position. We're not even in second position.
Wow.
Any of the financial instruments like bonds and things like that, they're in front of us. So if the bank goes bust, and there's a little bit of money left over, they'll get it. And if there's anything left over after that, we'll get it. So the minute you put your money in the bank, it is no longer your money. So those crazy conspiracy theorists that say, hey, keep all your money in a tin can or under your mattress and everything, there's actually something to it, because there's they changed the law. Now, and you saw a dress rehearsal of this in Cyprus a couple years ago. They did the same thing. Now, it wasn't as big of a deal in the United States, didn't make all the papers or the mainstream media as much as you might have thought, in part because so much of the holdings in Cyprus is held by Russians. And so it was like, we don't care about the Russians. But the reality was they all took, the depositors took huge haircut, 40%, I think, in some cases. Wow. And that, I think, is the real dress rehearsal for what could be coming our way. And it sounds crazy, of course, but if you remember a couple years ago, there was the federal government financed and sent out to all of the banks emergency preparedness kits that were like 3 days worth of food and like blankets and water and all this. And you're like, why the hell would you be sending all of this stuff to the banks? And but what it sounded like is like, if chaos ensues, this will keep you alive for 3 days. Well, I got news for you. If you're making $9 an hour working as a teller at Wells Fargo, you're not going to be defending that bank. You're going to walk out the front door and say, I'm out of here, So,
Charlie, is cryptocurrency the answer to this? Is Bitcoin and Ethereum going to save us? I certainly like it. I like the concept of it. There are issues with it, to be sure. But like anything, sort of the bugs are getting worked out. But the idea of like a decentralized currency that removes the control of the banks, I'm definitely in favor of that. Now, there are debates to be had about whether or not that technology has been corrupted secretly by the central banks. Or I know Chase has been, Jamie Dimon comes out and says, well, cryptos are terrible. We hate them. It's a fad or whatever. And then quietly they're buying up as much as they can get their hands on. So I think that everyone should operate with some caution in terms of wondering who, keep in mind that the central banks basically have a printing press, so they can print up as much money as they want and buy as much of whatever as they want. Right. Typically, what they've been doing is they've been issuing it as loans to people, and those people will go out and buy a house. And then if they then the market turns, the bank forecloses on their house, they loaned out imaginary money to get a tangible asset like a house. But I don't know that they would stop with that. I don't see why they wouldn't create money out of thin air to buy cryptos and pump up the bubble and then crash it to scare everybody out. That might have been what happened earlier this year, early 2018, when you saw Bitcoin spike like crazy and then crash. It might have been a pump and dump scheme by the banks. It could have been legitimate, just enthusiasm. I don't know, but
But I do like the idea of cryptos. I like the idea, anything that takes the power away from the banks, I'm in favor of. I think we should all be in favor of that. Now, I don't know which of the cryptos is the horse to bet on. Obviously, Bitcoin has the brand recognition, but I'm not. That's not my area of expertise. But I certainly do anything that makes the banks nervous. I'm very much in favor of.
But you've got an interesting perspective on this because you've got a financial background. You're very dialed into what most people watching would consider, the real news related to these things. You are not one of these people who watches CNN and believes what they say. You question everything, and your book goes into topics as far-ranging as 9/11 and Las Vegas. You talk about the Las Vegas shooting in interviews. Is that covered in the book?
No, that actually happened after the book,
yeah.
Right after the book came out. But I lived in Las Vegas for almost 10 years, and so I have this. The minute that happened, it's so weird. I woke up in the morning. My wife said, "Uh-oh, something bad has happened in Las Vegas." So I turned on the TV. I think I did probably turn on CNN, not to actually get any information, mind you, but just to hear what the mainstream media was saying.
Right.
And within a couple of minutes, there was something about that jumped out to me. It said, lone gunman. Now we're talking. This is 6 o'clock in the morning, so you're talking a couple hours or so after. And my thought was, why the rush? How do you know? How do you know it's a lone gunman? Take your time on this. It's okay if you say, here we are at CNN or MSNBC or whatever, it's crazy here, it's chaos. We're still trying to figure out what actually happened. But the fact that all the news channels immediately were saying lone gunman, and then that wasn't what I heard from the alternative media. I heard from a lot of people being interviewed saying, I was in Bellagio and I heard gunshots, and they said, "Well, how can you be sure?" And the lady's like, "Because I've been in the Bellagio and I know what it sounds like without gunshots, and then I know what it sounds like with gunshots. I'm pretty sure I know what it sounds like when people are shooting a gun in a casino, especially when this person in particular was talking about how they come there all the time. That's their place." And so I was like, "Well, this is interesting." And now I know. But to me, one of the things that jumped out, just in particular about that event, is the reaction to the introduction of new information. So at the police conference, when Laura Loomer stands up and says, I have information that shows that he checked in 3 days earlier. The police chief's response was, "Get out."
Right.
His response should have been, "Wait, what? You have information about this? Can we talk to you afterwards? That we would like to know what you know. This is interesting. This might be helpful for our investigation." That wasn't what happened. His response was, "Get the hell out of here." And so that to me is a huge red flag. Does that mean that the police were in on it? No, but it's an irrational response to a statement. If you're really investigating this, you should say, "I want all the information." That's what we do. We sift through all this stuff, and maybe you've got some bad information. We'll deal with that, but I would want it all. That's not the response. So when you see things like that, you start to question it. Now I understand that there's the truth, there's the lies, there's a disinformation campaign. It's very difficult to tell what is actually what really happened and what is, when you're being sent down false trails to sort of to get you away from the real story, or when they create a fake story, have everybody rush in and then expose it as being a fraud, and then say, you guys are all morons. You guys all went, you went for. That's a tactic that gets used quite a bit. So I think it pays to be sort of cautious and stand on the sidelines and say, "I don't have any answers right now. I'm trying to gather all that." But that's not what the mainstream media does. They form a narrative immediately, and then they run with it. And then anybody that challenges that narrative is marginalized, called a conspiracy theorist, and called a lunatic. It's like that's not the right way to conduct a news gathering organization. You should say that we're interested in finding out the truth, and maybe the truth, what we think is the truth right now, will change, and that's fine. And we should give them the benefit of the doubt to say, hey, we have, I feel with it, all the topics I cover, what I put in the book is my belief, and I reserve the right to change my opinion if I receive new information that changes the facts. I will not get myself so so focused on something that I say that this is the only possible way it can happen. I'm pretty sure I have answers on a lot of these topics, but I have to reserve the right to adjust if something new comes out, because information does come out all the time, but I don't think the mainstream media adheres to that philosophy. I think they're more concerned with the sensationalizing of it and the breaking news and the flashing lights and the all these like dog whistle type sounds that they have that put you in some sort of state of trance. The mainstream media, by the way, they love things like the Parkland shooting and the Las Vegas event and 9/11. They love it because it gets them great ratings, and they are in the entertainment business. They haven't been in the news business for a long, long time, especially CNN. So I that's why channels like yours are really important. It's important to gather information from as many different areas as you can, and yours is a great place to get it. Now, is it the only source of information? Of course not, but you get a lot of really smart people together that come in and you moderate this, and I think it's a good format. I think it's the way investigative journalism should be. It's like you said, it's crowdsourcing the truth. I mean, that's how you're going to get the most accurate version of the truth. And I think you've been doing a really great job of it, obviously, because people are trying to take you down. It's a good sign that you're on the right path.
Well, thank you for saying that, Charlie. I want to remind people who are possibly just tuning in, my guest right now, of course, is Charlie Robinson, and the book is The Octopus of Global Control. People can go on to Amazon and get that for the Kindle or in paperback. You could also choose to purchase it from a retailer that's not controlled by the CIA. But this is an excellent, well-reviewed book. Charlie mixes a little humor in there, and he's tried to make essentially an encyclopedia of false flags. This is a good book for people to buy, for maybe people in the family who scoff at everything you say when you say the Parkland shooting was a false flag, or that Stephen Paddock wasn't the lone gunman in the Las Vegas shooting, or that 9/11 was not a simple matter of 19 hijackers crashing airplanes into buildings. There's so much that you talk about in this book that I agree with you wholeheartedly on, Charlie, and I think that we really have, I think we're beyond reaching it. I think we're past a tipping point where there are a huge number of people who realize, even if they're not in agreement on all of these matters, I think there is a groundswell of people in the public in America who know that we've been lied to, and that things like Operation Mockingbird that control the flow of information in the mainstream media are real. And I want to thank you for your kind words about Crowdsource the Truth, because you're right. I haven't prompted you, correct, in any way to say any of that stuff. I appreciate you saying it. No. And this is why I started it. There's so much nonsense on the mainstream media, and people are brainwashed by it. So we need to wake up to those facts. And your book and this program are hopefully both important tools in helping people do that. Yeah, and so with the name of your show being about the truth, I want to get into something about that. Now, the format of the book was that I took quotes from over 500 different people that had some sort of role or an opinion on the most important events in our country's, or in the world's history, really. Mm-hmm. And some of them were like the Rockefellers and Rothschilds and Kissinger and George H.W. Bush, the worst person on the planet. Yes. But some of them were also, like I said, Joe Rogan and George Carlin, Bill Hicks, people like that. But so I'm going to read a quote that I had that's in the book. It's in the introduction to the book, because I think it sets the tempo for where the book goes and where your show goes as far, as well. Right. And it's by Stephen Bassett. He's the executive director of Paradigm Research Group, and it's about the topic of the truth. He says, imagine if the truth was a huge jigsaw puzzle, a big box with 20,000 pieces, and it is the truth, the absolute truth. It is a picture of the world as it really is. You come into this world, you get an education, you are handed this box, and the idea is to put all the pieces together. And if you put the pieces together on this huge table, it will be the truth about the world that you live in. So you set about to do that. All good, a wonderful thing, except there's a problem. It turns out that the government that you're living under has made a decision to interfere with this truth process. It's a political decision.
being made for political reasons to serve the state, almost never the citizens. So the government has taken a whole bunch of those pieces out of your box and has thrown them away. They're missing. Well, that's a problem, but it gets worse. They've grabbed a bunch of pieces from another box, another puzzle, and thrown them into your box, to your puzzle. And now you have to put this thing together with an idea that what you're going to find is the truth. That is an almost impossible situation, and it is extremely effective to serve the state. So that's where we are. We're trying to put together a puzzle with the pieces that we have, and we are making the assumption that all these pieces will fit together, and sometimes they just won't. So that's why I think it's really important to have the ability to get a lot of people working on this. Like you said, you're crowdsourcing. You get people from all over the place, not just this country, but from all over the world. Hey, you have information that's important? Give it to us. We are not the sheriff in Las Vegas. We want your information. We want to just figure this out. I don't care if I figure it out or you figure it out or some guy in Argentina figures it out. As long as it gets sorted out and we can get the truth, that's really all that matters. I mean, that should be all that matters. And we check our egos and all that stuff. But that's when I wrote the book, the intention, because I cover so many topics, and I don't expect people to agree with everything every topic that I go into. I think that's unrealistic and it's unnecessary.
Right.
But the intention of it was that if there's somebody in your life, if there's a friend, a family member, somebody that you really like that thinks you are a lunatic for believing these things, and you have gone as far as you can go down that path with somebody because they're just not willing to hear it anymore. They don't want you to come to the party because you're going to talk about 9/11. Right. Send them the book. The reason is I cover so many topics, and I do it in a way. I use the words of other people, like all of these, like I said, like the people that had a hand in this, and then I pepper in my warped, horrible sense of humor to try and make light of this stuff, because I mean, let's face it, these topics are really dark. I mean, we get into some things that are unpleasant to think about, but just because they're unpleasant and just because they're not really dinner table type topics of conversation doesn't mean we should ignore them. We get sort of brainwashed into thinking, oh well, I don't want to get into this, like this is too depressing. Well, that's we get what we have now, which is a society where everyone has basically turned a blind eye to a lot of the important things. And so my feeling was if you could send them the book, they could go through it and they might find a topic in there that appeals to them, that wakes them up. In my case, it was Building 7 on 9/11 that woke me up. It didn't happen in 2001. I wish I could say that it did, but it took years after that. But for me, that was the one thing where I went, wait a second, this is not right. Now, but for other people, it might be something else. It might be, the Gulf of Tonkin. It might be about, some aspects of World War II or whatever. So you never know what it is that's going to wake somebody up. But as we all know, if you're watching this, you've probably gone down the rabbit hole, and there's always one thing that sort of starts you down that path, and then you just keep picking away, and next thing you know, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. You're on the internet going, I need to go to sleep. I have to turn YouTube off. I can't watch this anymore. So
right. And if people want to keep up with you, Charlie, they can do that on your Facebook page. They can just search for the Octopus of Global Control on Facebook, and you're making regular posts on there, and there's interaction that people can get into. They can also follow you on Twitter. It's going to be at Mowefus, MOWEFUS, and you can link to the Facebook page from there. Now, Charlie, something I found interesting when I was preparing for our interview this afternoon and preparing the graphic that I made. Now, people may notice that the graphic that I've chosen uses an embroidered logo that's slightly different than the book cover, but obviously the book cover was derived from this logo. This is for something called NROL 39, and on that patch, the people who have created this logo are boasting that nothing is beyond their reach. And in looking this thing up, I myself went down a bit of a rabbit hole, because this NROL 39 is the logo for the National Reconnaissance Office, and they launched a satellite that this was like 2013 or something. And what inspired you to use this image?
Well, I would like to say, first of all, that you were the first person to notice that, to make that connection between them. But yes, it is. They have a patch for every one of their missions, much like NASA does too. And people will get into those NASA patches and find like all sort of symbology, and it's fascinating. But the National Reconnaissance Office has they have given up on the subtlety. They're just saying, listen, nothing's beyond our reach. Like we are launching this spy satellite, and we are going to have access to everything, and that is. Alarming, I think, and this is what makes it into the mainstream news. So think of what we don't know. If they're they're obviously taunting us,
right?
And they don't care.
Business
they don't
Insider
care.
We're looking at.
Yeah, Business Insider, exactly. Yeah,
which I believe is a deep state controlled entity in and of itself. I'm
sure it is. I wouldn't be surprised. It's funny because I'm like, hey, you guys want to check me out? Go to Facebook. Of course, Facebook is like the most CIA-controlled thing out there. So I do, and believe me, I understand the hypocrisy of that. I get it.
I wonder if this guy knows Peter Strozik. They both need to buy a vowel. Zlorda. I don't know what that guy's name is.
Something tells me that he's not getting all of the information from the NRO that they have. I'm sure there's something terrible about it. In fact, there's a clip people can find online that shows Jon Stewart from The Daily Show did a bit on this actual patch as well, and he was just like what are you guys doing? He was up in arms about it, which of course, but he did it in a funny way, which. When I set out to write the book, I kind of I'm not trying to say I'm Jon Stewart in any way, but I liked his style of presenting it. It was like he presented some really difficult topics from time to time, but he did it in a way with humor, which meant he wasn't actually laughing at this. He was just making light of it and using humor as a way to sort of
makes it more accessible, I think.
Make it more accessible. Keep you engaged a little bit longer. And if you have any sort of mental capacity, you can you can understand what is the serious part of the story from what is the jokey part of the story, and get something out of it. And I think Joe Rogan does that really well. In fact, there's a quote that I put in the book from Joe Rogan talking about how he saw Jon Stewart do that, and he felt that was a really good way to get important information across. So that's the way I chose to do it. Everyone's got their own little style.
I do like Joe Rogan. One of the most shocking things about the National Reconnaissance Office is that it was founded in 1961 and not even acknowledged until 1992. But despite being acknowledged some 26 years ago, I never heard of this damn thing until today. So how many intelligence agencies does the United States government have under its control? What are each of them doing? Like this seems, if they're launching satellites, how many billions of dollars are funding this super secret thing that we've never heard about? What's their purpose? What's the oversight of this? How does this relate to the CIA, the NSA, the FBI? And we're now, I think, in 2017 and 18, really kind of cracking the shell and getting a look at the disgusting inside of the control mechanisms of the FBI and the Department of Justice. And it appears to be substantially corrupt. So all of these unknown secret agencies that are launching satellites where nothing is beyond their reach, and we don't even know who they are, it's pretty scary.
Of course. I wouldn't even have a guess as to how many spy agencies or government agencies that are doing things like this. I mean, I'm sure there was nothing going on for that quarter century when they were an unannounced project. I mean, good Lord. I mean, can you even imagine what's going on there? No accountability as far as the money. And Catherine Austin Fitts has done a really good job of digging into where the missing, $21 trillion from HUD. That's just HUD and DOD. But like, who knows where the rest of it? I mean, clearly these are getting financed by some mechanism. And as you talked about going into the FBI, and I get into how the CIA has funded their operations for decades. I mean, there's a certain amount of their.
How are they
there's a certain
doing
amount of their budget that they get each year from the government, and they stand up and they say we need it for this, and I think people need to understand that a lot of these events that happen, especially for the FBI, they're allowed to happen, and they're allowed to happen in order to justify their bloated budgets.
Are they allowed to happen, or are they caused to happen?
Both. I think in some cases they will take some guy that's mentally challenged. They'll say, hey, you should build a bomb. And this guy goes, yeah, you think I should build a bomb? Then, hey, we'll give you all the supplies. How much money do you need? We'll give them the money. And then they bust that, either right before it happens or while some guy's trying to light his crotch on fire when he's getting on an airplane.
Yeah.
And I put that in the book too, because in that particular instance where the underwear bomber and Richard Reeve, the shoe bomber, they both have a lot of things in common. They're both technically mentally retarded.
Wow.
And they were both put on airplanes. The passengers that were sort of waiting said, in the case of Farouk El-Matab, the underwear bomber, he was taken by a well-dressed Indian man in the airport, I think in Amsterdam, taken past security. That Indian man spoke to the gate agent. They had a bit of an argument, and then he was allowed to put that guy, take him down the flightway, down to the cockpit, put him, to the entrance to the airplane,
right.
Put him in the seat. He had no identification. He had no passport. He had nothing. And then that Indian guy, the well-dressed Indian man, walked back out and got out and left. And then, of course, and there were actually two guys. There was another guy with him that was filming the whole thing. So there was a lot to the story that didn't make, and this guy was a moron. He was incapable of doing anything. But if you remember, that was that was international news. So the CIA, the FBI, these agencies will create, they'll manufacture reasons to justify their budget, and then they will get this large budget. And then in the CIA's case, they will then freelance, sort of moonlight, to make some additional money so that they can use that on the covert activities that they're not allowed to discuss, that they want, that Congress would never approve money for. So right. So they run drugs. They've run cocaine, and they ran cocaine and heroin for decades. And right. I don't think that's a secret to most people that have sort of done any sort of research on that. They'll right. understand what has happened in Afghanistan.
Iran-Contra and all that.
Iran-Contra, all that. That was it. Now they're not even hiding that anymore. They Tom Cruise is an American made. He's Barry Seal. He's running coke out of,
right.
He's running coke and dumping it in
But
Neenah,
they
Arkansas.
took some liberties, I think, in that film,
Of course.
changing the story around to make it a little bit, more favorable for them. Charlie, have you seen any of the episodes of America's First Refugee, in which Harmon Wilford describes how, as a CIA contractor, he was asked to transact some bearer bonds worth billions of dollars with a private trust, and he discovered that this money was being used by the CIA for covert operations, and as he began to blow the whistle on this activity, his life was sort of ruined. Are you aware of Harmon's story at all?
I'm only aware of it from watching a little bit of the interviews that you've done, and he's in New Zealand. Is that correct?
Right.
Yeah. Interesting story. I'd like to say I'm surprised by it, but I'm not. I wouldn't say that I know the story inside and out for sure, but it's interesting, and it's unfortunately not surprising. I think that people, one of the things that really bothered me when I heard about it was how they transported the drugs out of Vietnam back to the States, how the CIA did that, and how they ran
bodies of soldiers, right?
Yeah. That's about as disrespectful as you can get. First of all, they concoct these fake wars under false pretenses, send our troops in there that shouldn't be there to kill a bunch of other people that shouldn't be getting invaded,
killed.
and then on the way out, as if that wasn't enough of a sacrifice, and that they stuff packages of heroin inside their bodies to transport it back. Yeah, if that doesn't piss you off, I don't know what will. But so that has been the part of the way the CIA has funded itself, and it's not limited to drugs. There's no doubt that they're involved in every sort of thing that you can be involved in, whether it's credit card frauds and charity selling
frauds,
charity. Oh yeah,
cryptocurrency scams.
Of course.
So, but as a guy with a substantial finance background, don't you find it odd that these cryptocurrencies and the companies, I mean, Bitcoin is unique in that the person who created it is totally anonymous. It's not a Steve Jobs, it's not a Mark Zuckerberg, it's not someone who's out there saying, hey, I'm going to enjoy the glory and buy a yacht and all this. I mean, as an investor or as someone in the finance world, if you heard that, oh, well, this mortgage is going to be backed by someone totally anonymous, that's unheard of, isn't it?
It's either incredibly brilliant or really suspicious, or probably both. I understand the story behind it is that he wanted to remain anonymous when creating that, and I can maybe buy that story, but I also have, with basically anything that I'm hearing, I'm also thinking, how's the CIA involved in this? Right. Wouldn't they want to be anonymous as well? So I have a hard time. This is why people go down this path, and then their brain starts to hurt, and they go, "I'm just going to go watch Family Feud," because it's just a lot easier than thinking about this. Could the whole creation of Bitcoin be a CIA fabrication to sucker everybody in and then blow the whole market up? Yeah, could be. It'd be horrible, but I wouldn't be surprised. So I have to worry about things like that as well. At some point, I have to say, I just don't know. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Do you have any cryptocurrency? Are you an investor or a user of cryptocurrency?
I'm not an investor in cryptocurrency, but that is not because I'm not a believer in it. I just have financial obligations that put me in a position where I don't have the luxury of just saying I'm gonna bet on all these horses, all these. I wish I had. I wish I was the guy that took the 10,000 Bitcoins for 2 pizzas. It'd be a whole different story.
Running the pizza shop, for sure.
Yeah.
So, exactly. Charlie, the book, of course, is The Octopus of Global Control, and you're dealing with a lot of controversial topics. People can get this book on Kindle or in paperback on Amazon. If you have Prime, you could probably still get it tomorrow. Start reading it right away. Charlie, have you encountered any resistance since publishing this book? A lot of people who delve into these topics, including myself, meet with online trolls and all kinds of strange things going on. Any of that happening with you?
I've had some interviews that we've done miraculously jam up on Skype. But for the most part, people have been actually really supportive. I must confess to being a bit surprised by it. There are some polarizing topics, and like I said earlier, I do not expect people to agree with everything I said, and that's okay. But I think that to have the conversation about some of these topics is important. It's not for everybody, for sure. There are a lot of people that would prefer to stay asleep, and I get that. It's a big task to wake up.
Cognitive dissonance is real.
It is. It's real, and it's there for a reason. It's your brain trying to protect you. There's
from
pain
painful
coming.
Truth.
Yeah, there's pain coming there, and when you think about having to maybe unwind your whole life, and the concept of, hey, what if my entire life has been a lie? That is a big.
Yeah,
that's a big thing to task to take on. So I'm not trying to say that everybody's world, everybody has been living a lie. There have been a lot of things that have been sold to us that are absolutely lies. There's some, and of the 8 tentacles of control that I outline in the book, in my opinion, the 2 most dangerous ones are the 2 that we've focused on: the banking and the media. And I think people would be surprised that they would think that maybe the military control would be the most dangerous. And of course, they're the destruction arm of this. But the banking has enslaved and has murdered and has led to the deaths of millions and hundreds of millions of people, not just now, but over time, because it is so unbelievably effective at controlling people. And then the secondary part to that we've seen in the last part of, in the last 50 years or so, has been the media control. Right. And we are all guilty of that on some level, of buying it, whether it was, just your typical, your nightly news, or your local news, or the fact that you see.
Are we guilty of that, or are we victims of that?
We're victims of it. We're victims of it. Yeah, I should say. Where we become guilty of it is when we know better, but then we still watch it anyway, or we right. keep expecting a different result we keep thinking, well, maybe this time CNN will tell us the truth. CNN told us 2 days after 9/11 that a hijacker's passport was found 3 blocks from the crash site in perfect condition, if you can believe that, was what the guy said. I mean, how dare you pass that up? That is like insulting on a level that is hard to imagine. And yet we swallowed it. Like the guy reading the teleprompter couldn't believe the words were coming out of his mouth. He was like, if you can believe that. No, not even you can believe that. You're the guy reading the script. But we fall for it, and that we fall for Anderson Cooper. Oh, Anderson Cooper seems like a decent dude, or
like his haircut.
Yeah, he seems like. I mean, never mind the fact that he's from the Vanderbilts, but we get into these. We expect Anderson Cooper to wake up and go, I can't do it anymore. I just can't do it anymore. I'm going to walk away from this. I can't read these lies anymore. He walks out, he's going to solve the problem, walks out the door, 100 guys in his place going, I'll take that job. So the problem doesn't go away. I think the best part, the way that we can take the power away from the media is to acknowledge that we have a problem. We have a problem with the corporate media. There's a gigantic problem there. They are a for-profit institution that relies on selling advertising around their news. It used to be that the news was just sort of, they tried to get as many people as they could so they could funnel that to their primetime shows.
Right.
Now the news is the show.
Right.
And you think you're going to get some sort of honest story about how vaccines are legitimately hurting people on your nightly news, when every other commercial on the nightly news is from a pharmaceutical company? Yeah. Give me a break. Good luck. That'll never happen. So you're never going to get it there. And there's a misconception with a lot of people that if it's not on the nightly news, then it's not happening.
Right, it's not real or something
it's not real.
Like that.
Yeah,
I think you've hit on a hugely important topic here. And I mean, of course, everyone working, no matter what it might be, needs money. And so, saying that it's for profit, I mean, this was one of the problems that I tried to tackle with Crowdsource the Truth. Some of the people that have tried to, stop me from interviewing people like yourself or Laurel Everly and Thomas Paine and Robin Gritz and all of the CIA and FBI and law enforcement and first-hand witnesses that we bring forward, they try to disparage me for attempting to earn money from doing this. But obviously I couldn't continue doing it without money. The key that you mentioned is I don't want a big corporate sponsor. The whole goal of funding Crowdsource the Truth is small individual sponsorship payments from the people who benefit from hearing these stories. And that doesn't mean that you even necessarily have to like everything that I say, but there are a lot of people who still don't get the process of Crowdsource the Truth. It's not about me vetting every single guest and every single story and knowing everything about every topic. As you pointed out, I like to invite experts like yourself to this venue to share their information among the community, everyone watching, and I do my best to sort of act as a hub. And when someone comes to me with sensible, factual information that's contradictory, I absolutely want to bring that forward. The problem that we get into is there are so many people who just want to throw barbs and personally insult me or put strikes on the video to try to stop us from moving forward, or try to bring fake lawsuits against me and insist that I lawyer up. The reason they're doing that is they want to financially drain me. So it's really important for people that watch Crowdsource the Truth to become sponsors for a small amount of money, $1, $5 a month at patreon.com/crowdsource the truth, or even a one-time sponsorship payment on paypal.me/crowdsource the truth is really important. And likewise, people who appreciate the information that you're bringing forward, Charlie, should buy the book. It's on Kindle. It's very reasonably priced. You can get it for $9.99. You can get the paperback for $19.10 if you're on Amazon Prime. I'm sure Barnes & Noble. Where else can people get this?
Actually, I just put it on Amazon because they have such wide reach internationally too. Yeah,
right.
And there's nothing wrong with you charging for your work.
Right.
You worked. I had some people say, "Hey, you're selling a book." Yeah, I'm selling it. You want me to give it away? I worked really hard on it. I'm not. Let's be honest here. None of us are getting into the truth movement for the money.
Right.
I think that would be quite preposterous to say that. And if you have sponsors for your program, if you have thousands of different sponsors that are all contributing what they feel a fair amount, that's great. If you make one of them mad, they can't go to the chairman of the board and complain to pull their funding from this and sink the whole operation, like the way Merck can.
Exactly.
They're going to go into, if Anderson Cooper grows a conscience overnight and decides he's gonna do a big expose on pharmaceuticals and everything,
they'll kick him out.
Who do you think's going to be in the ABC's office the next morning threatening to pull $1 billion worth of advertising? But the presidents of all of these large pharmaceutical companies. So you can't.
And it doesn't even need to be that direct, Charlie. You spoke about Vegas, and of course we know Tucker Carlson made sort of a mini step towards trying to expose some helicopter activity in Vegas. He went to Vegas. Very clearly, someone told Tucker Carlson, stop talking about Vegas. And they don't need to sit him down with the CIA and explain that this is a huge, massive cover-up that you're now part of. They just say, hey, you like that $10 million a year salary? Stop talking about it. And
hey, Phil Donahue. Phil Donahue, you liked your show. You stood up and said something about Afghanistan, and your show went away.
Right.
Bill Maher, same thing.
That's
right. Tucker Carlson, like you said, doesn't need he doesn't need the sit down from the management to understand what can happen. I mean, these guys know there is a line in the sand. They might not know exactly where it is. They might want to cross over a little bit over it every now and then to test the boundaries. But you do that too much, and you'll be Ed Schultz. You'll be out. Yeah. You'll be out of there. You'll be you'll be looking for a job somewhere, and you won't have solved the problem necessarily because the person behind you will fill that role. They'll toe the line.
Absolutely.
They'll take that large paycheck, and they'll shut their mouths about the areas that they're not supposed to. So you can't look to. None of us can look to the mainstream media to fix the mainstream media. They're dead, and they have nobody to blame but themselves. Yeah, they really have overplayed.
That's why it's such a difficult problem, and why it's difficult for people like you and I who are stepping outside of the box of the normal, mainstream narrative. That's why it makes it really difficult to do that. So, Charlie, just in the last few minutes that we have right here, you spoke about the 8 tentacles of control, and you've said, we've got media, we've got banking. Those are obviously linked in clear ways. The finance, the money owns the media. What are the other 6 tentacles that people can expect to read about in the octopus of global control?
Governmental control, covert control, physical control, media, spiritual, scientific, and military. And they're all important. They're all part of this. I'm not the first to come out with the concept of the octopus. That's been going for over 100 years. It's been used as a term to sort of define this. And in part, you've got 8 tentacles. You've got a very intelligent creature that is very mysterious. It has the ability to change its colors. It has the ability to change its texture. It can stay and fight. It can squirt ink and flee. It's really fast. If it's been in a cave, it can remember the inside of what that cave was, the layout of that cave over 3 years after it's left.
Wow.
So you're talking about the perfect, and if it can get its eyeball through a space, it can get the rest of its body through. So it's like the perfect metaphor, because you talk about just get into an organization and then the rest, you pull the rest of it in with you. the octopus is a perfect example of that as an animal. And then John Francis Hyland, who was the mayor of New York City in 1922, gave a great speech talking about this octopus, and he defined it as being the Standard Oil Rockefeller interest, talked about how they controlled everything. And when you read his speech, you would, if you didn't know who it was and you didn't know when it was said, you would assume that it was some guy talking about it last week, because he's talking about how they have control of the media, they have control of the courthouses, they club into submission anyone that stands up to them, they finance all these politicians, they let the politicians do the dirty work for them. And that's another thing that we haven't really gotten into, but we blame these politicians, and they're horrible people, the majority of the ones that rise to high levels of political power. But they're only the puppets. There are people above them. And I put on my Facebook page, there's a great video that shows the Prime Minister of Canada and the Prime Minister of Australia in 2003 in the lead up to the Iraq War, both giving the identical speech within 2 days of one another to their parliaments, pushing for the war in Iraq. And whoever made the video did a split screen with the two of them talking, giving the speech, and they're saying the same words, not sort of the same words, they're reading the identical speech. And so you see that and you go, this is coming from somebody above them. And this is an orchestrated event. And so I found that, people say, well, the politicians are in control. No, politicians are not in control. There are people above them that wish to remain nameless and out of sight because it benefits them. So they let these politicians rise up, and they control them completely. They allow them to, have the ego trip of being a senator or whatever. But don't kid yourself. They are compromised human beings, not because the job makes them compromised, but they get that job because they're controllable, because they're either, in the 60s they were, it might be that they're cheating on their wife and they had that dirt on them, or it was that they're closeted homosexual, or now it's
none of that works
you're
anymore.
Pedophile.
Yeah.
No, I mean it's you but they get the dirt on you through these brown.
They create it.
They
People have been
manufacture it,
coming out with false stories about me and just
absolutely.
repeating them. And enough people hear it that they think, well, that must be true. I heard it from 2 people, 3 people. I saw it online. This is what they're doing. It's a systematic defamation, and it's really upsetting. Yeah. My guest right now, for everyone who's just tuned in, is Charlie Robinson, and the book is The Octopus of Global Control. You can get it at Amazon.com exclusively. People should be buying and reading this book. You can connect with Charlie on Facebook by searching for The Octopus of Global Control, and you can find him on Twitter at Mowefus, M-O-W-E-F-U-S. Charlie, I really enjoy the conversation. Definitely want to have you back soon so we can dig into some more of these topics. Is there anything else you want to share with our audience before we sign off for the evening?
I want to end it on a positive note. We have a lot of amazing things in this world, in our future. These bastards have been controlling us for a long time, but they forget that we have the numbers. We really do. We just have to remember that. We have to wake up to that fact. If you've ever seen that movie, A Bug's Life, it's animated for kids. There's a scene in there where the main grasshopper is saying that you can't let these ants stand up to us, because if you let one of them stand up to us, they'll understand that they outnumber us 1,000,000 to 1. We can't have. So that's the mentality of the people that are running this world right now, is that they're the grasshoppers, we're the ants, and they cannot allow us to remember or to understand how much power we actually have, and that we have the numbers, because if we figure that out, the game's up for them. So it's important for us to remember that. It's important for us to also be positive. This stuff's really, there's some horrible stuff that we talk about, and there's some bad things going on in this world. But man, we have to stay positive too, because you're never going to attract enough people to understand your point of view on these things if it's always doom and gloom, and right. So I
still feel like we can pull this one out, Charlie, if we stick
absolutely
together.
Can.
We've got a president who's wanting to drain the swamp, and I see him making progress. North Korea seems to be going the way we want it to. Andrew McCabe, James Comey are looking at not very good situations, and it's sending a message to the people that want to try to do evil against the masses of good people in the United States and around the world. And I want to appeal to those people to purchase the book that Charlie has written so they can learn more about this octopus of global control, and knowledge is power. So Charlie, I want to thank you for joining me today. I want to wish you a good weekend, a happy Memorial Day. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. We'll be back with you some point in the future, Charlie. I look forward to having you on again.
Absolutely. It'd be my pleasure. Thanks for having me so much.
And thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you tomorrow.